Hi, my name is Jessica Gardner, and I'm the Programs Manager for the Seattle Japanese Garden. Thank you so much for attending our Kaleidoscope virtual event, World of Butoh with Kogut Butoh. The Kaleidoscope series came about in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and our desire to bring the Seattle Japanese Garden to our visitors at a time when they may or may not be able to come see it in person. We are so fortunate to have the support of the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership and their sponsorship of this series. Butoh is an art that's been performed in the Seattle Japanese Garden for almost 10 years now during our annual Wandering and Wondering event. And of course this year we couldn't do the event in person, so instead we've put together this incredible presentation with Joan Laage, aka Kogut Butoh. In August of this year, she and two other Butoh dancers, Shoko Zama and Katrina Wolf, came to visit the garden and do a socially distanced performance with one videographer to get some film. We've put all of that together to create this presentation, and I'm going to hand things off to Joan to go ahead and get it started.
Since I became a guide at the Seattle Japanese Garden in 2010, I've also started performing. And it's become like a second home to me. I really like spending time in gardens, and I'm especially captivated by the Japanese garden, as it's a traditional garden and all the elements that are in it. Also, when I think about the art of Butoh, which I've pursued, it's been my path for 30-some years or longer. So Butoh for me is a celebration of the body as nature. And also when we think about how does movement come, how is it generated, and shaping of the body, and what kind of themes, well, nature themes and nature imagery are often used in Butoh. I'd say they're the key imagery used in Butoh. Also, as a director, I'm very happy to be able to share the garden and the garden experiences with other performers, other dancers, and musicians, and we all realize what an incredibly wonderful experience it is for us and for our audiences. And I really enjoy the kind of interactions I can have in Butoh. I come from a very dance background, modern dance, improvisation, contact improvisation, and traditional dance forms, including Japanese dance and theater. My husband David and I settled in Seattle in 1990 after living in Japan off and on from the mid-80s. David was building his writing career, and we were both teaching English to survive, but I was there to do research on Butoh towards a PhD in dance and related arts, which I later gained out of Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. In Tokyo, I saw many Butoh performances in tiny venues and large venues, solos, big groups, well-known and lesser-known artists, some hardly known at all. I first encountered Butoh while teaching and performing modern dance in Hong Kong in 1982, where I saw a photo of a bald, white-faced Maru Akaji in a gallery. then soon went to Japan for the first time in 1982 while teaching on the Semester at Sea program. And actually, when I saw this picture, it was in the dance office when I was living in Hong Kong. I don't even remember the word Butoh, but somehow I remember Akajimaro's name. And so when I did visit Japan for the first time, I was very lucky to find Akajimaro's name and his company, Dairakudokan, in the paper and attend a performance, which led me on to this amazing journey from there on. I soon began taking classes when living in Japan, using my own dancer's body as a research tool, which led me to studying with Yoko Ashikawa. So Yoko Ashikawa is the principal founder, Tatsumi Hijikata's main protege, and later to being asked to join Ashikawa's second group, Gnome, which only had a few foreigners in it. This work under Ashikawa, the training methods, the way of working with imagery and choreography left an indelible imprint on my body and psyche and led me on a life and artistic path that I continue to pursue today. But in fact, my first Butoh teacher was really Kazuo Ono, who I studied with over a number of years living in and later visiting Japan, and later his son Yoshito. After settling in Seattle, I began teaching 2, then 3 times a week, thinking it was the only way for me to continue to absorb and make sense of my experiences in Japan, and towards finding my own way with these foundations. Dappen Butoh Troupe was founded soon after, which I directed until 2001. And the word Dappen, D-A-P-P-I-N-G, or D-A-P-P apostrophe, actually came from a performance I did with one of Kazuo Ono's students. And we were trying to find a title for our performance, and we came up with this sense of shedding, and Dappen is kind of a loose translation into English. Until I set down my Butoh roots in Seattle, Butoh was an art that people only experienced every couple of years when the world-famous Sankaijuku toured, and later Kazuo and Yoshito and a few other artists came. I became known as the Northwest Butoh pioneer because I brought Butoh into the ongoing performance scene and taught many people who went on to create their own work. And Dappen became well known in dance and theater festivals and producing its own work. As an artist steeped in Butoh and one who wrote a dissertation on Butoh called Embodying the Spirit, or that's the short title for it, I've lectured on Butoh history and aesthetics throughout the years. Maybe we could think of a recipe for Butoh with certain ingredients or the elements that lend to our understanding of what it is and how and when it came about. Here are some of the ingredients feeding directly into the body: the traditional, theater, and art. So in traditional theater, what they do is they have what they call kata, which kata basically means form, and they practice the form and they perfect the forms until they become perfect, so to speak. And then later, as the artist continues and later in his life, there's this sense of some expansion of the inner, somehow, self of the energy of the artist coming out. Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism, the sense of selflessness, the sense of emptiness. So with Butoh, the body as a vessel, which I'll talk about later. The lifestyle and livelihood. So how these shape the body and the motion. And the aesthetics. So the aesthetic, the beauty in aging and in grotesquerie, for example. Other essential ingredients are the search for a contemporary dance style which could emerge from the Japanese bodies and sensibilities. And this rose out of the loss of identity that came from the aftermath of World War II. And the notions of the rights and importance of the individuality were stressed, that were infused with post-World War II American occupation. This encouraged individual creativity in the arts and unique voices as different from those codified forms of traditional arts. And there's a well-known phrase, something like the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. So that sense of taki, or taki is a bamboo, and it's well, you think of the bamboo, but they're all the roots are connected. So that's much about Japanese traditional society and how people are connected. In this case, the individual wanted to break free to find his or her own voice. There was also the 60s USA-Japan Defense Treaty, where there were student riots. Of course, there were riots in other parts of the world, but this had to do with this particular treaty. So Hijikata's sense of disorientation and rebellion of the body really suited, really connected with the students of this rebellion. And this rebellion, especially of the artists, they felt a sense of imprisonment from traditional forms and customs, from modernization, which all came so quickly, and westernization, which in this case was primarily Americanization. The earlier influence on dance had been German expressionists. And of course, also Hijikata and others used themes and ideas that were influenced by Genet, Artaud, and there were other crossings over between Japan and in Europe at that time, artistically. Also, the common Japanese physique, which some artists such as Hijikata and Ono felt that the contemporary Western dance form didn't suit their bodies and their Japanese sensibilities. So Hijikata and Ono both studied Western ballroom dance, modern dance, ballet, and were familiar with and even participated in folk and traditional arts. In Hijikata's casting off the skin of Western dance, he created what is known as the first Butoh work called Kinjiki, or Forbidden Colors, in 1959. It was named after the title of a book written by Yukio Mishima, who was in Hijikata's art circle. It was a far contrast from the modern dance of the day, musicless, absence of the usual theatrical lighting, a dark theme, a sense of anti-dance, of breaking form, and he was thusly expelled from the Modern Dance Association that he had been a part of. After 10 years of experimenting in chaos and disorientation of the body, of the art of dance as he had practiced it, he created Rebellion of the Flesh in 1969. This became a turning point, after which he returned to his roots in Tohoku, and Tohoku is in northern Japan, and he shifted into recalling the lifestyle and livelihood of his childhood, growing up with many siblings in the cold northern winters, working in the fields, how the weather and landscape affected the body, the freezing weather freezing the body and making the body contract, for example. and how the bodies walked and worked in the fields. Ashikawa soon joined him, and others, and he began to create training methods and structures for creating work, specific ways to work with imagery and text, ending up in some kata, or remember kata is kind of a word we use for form, that some artists still use today, and their postures and gestures that became a foundation for many future artists. Hijikata's legacy spawned groups in a family tree. He became known as the architect and Ono, the soul of Butoh, with Ono's family tree consisting mostly of solo performers whose work have more of an improvisational base, generally. There's much gender play in costuming movement in Butoh, and Ono himself is kind of a Butoh Onagata. Onagata means a female form, which is known from Kabuki. And you can see Ono wearing very elegant Western gowns and also kimonos. Hijikata asked Ono to join him early on, but then Ono soon went on to forge his own artistic solo path, sometimes performing with his son Yoshito, who, interestingly enough, was in Kinjiki, that first Butoh piece that I mentioned. People often cite the devastation of the atomic bomb as the greatest influence on Butoh's themes and aesthetics. In interviews, most artists I spoke with or read about didn't really mention this, although I maintain that it had to be in their psyches, in their cells, and in their bodies. A couple of artists did have vivid memories of being in their mothers' bellies at the time. Butoh's main theme is that of life in its fullest, the cycle of life and death, the largest questions of existence. From early on, Hijikata exposed the underbelly and unsavory aspects of culture, the forbidden and the uncomfortable, homeless, destitute, maimed, and homosexuality. And I often say that it is the dance of existence, the poetry of the body. Hijikata is known for saying that Butoh is a corpse standing up. I think of it as what force or energy keeps the body upright, moving and shaping. And there are a lot of questions of what is the body, or maybe that's the first question here. The body, as I mentioned before, the body as a vessel is common to Butoh, meaning not the body that is full of the bones and muscles that we usually experience and organs. And the training often includes working with this empty body, becoming a water body or a body full of air and wind. Hijikata, when he went on to develop his own training methods and creating work with his groups, he often used ukiyo-e prints and also imagery from Western and Japanese visual artists. And the images weren't only for the body, which created movement, and shaping of the body, but also about the space. So with the mind, one's mind and energy, one created the environment surrounding the body, or that the body was immersed in. Although it is true that there are many styles and driving factors of artists under the umbrella Butoh, with some not fed by this kind of imagery, perhaps they're merely fed by the philosophy of existence, of life force, and energy. By the 1970s, Japanese artists began performing abroad and started relocating to Germany and other countries. So Butoh, over the many years, has become a global phenomenon, and with Japanese and non-Japanese artists practicing in many countries throughout the world. And Butoh can be seen in theaters, large and small. Many places it's still very underground. It can also be seen in places such as the Seattle Japanese Garden, outdoor spaces, urban spaces. So I often think about, that the Butoh dancer could actually just dance on a dime. Very flexible in terms of the kind of space and environment that the Butoh dancer can exist in and can perform in.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for the first of the Kaleidoscope series, The World of Butoh. I'm Chie Ida. I'm the events coordinator for the Seattle Japanese Garden. Tonight we have Joan Laage of Kogut Butoh here with us for a live Q&A. Hi, Joan.
Hi.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Tonight. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to work with us to prepare such a wonderful presentation, especially during such challenging time. Well, let's get started with Q&A. So please type in your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box that you find at the bottom of the window. Okay. All right. Question number one, Joan, are you ready?
Sure, I'm ready.
If I'm interested in learning to dance Butoh, where do I start?
Well, in Seattle, at present, there are a few different teachers. Off and on, it changes from one or two to more. I'm also a founding member of Daipan Butoh Collective. We started about 9 or 10 years ago. And besides our core group, which is about 6 women at the moment, we connect with all the other Butoh dancers in town. So we often offer a series of classes, and sometimes I'm teaching or other people are teaching. And also within that group, sometimes those people teach their own. So we will be putting up my website, and then you can contact me if you are interested. I don't know that there's anything going on now, although we have a series, an online series at the moment.
Great. Okay, thank you. Next question. Why did you choose Butoh over other modern dance forms?
I don't know, I can't remember how much of my history in dance that you heard about, but I have a long background in dance, contemporary dance, improvisation, contact improvisation, but I've also studied other dance forms, especially traditional dance forms, and in particular Bharatanatyam, which is South Indian classical dance. I have a little bit of background in Indonesian dance too, just a little bit of flamenco, and as I said, a little bit in Japanese dance. And I found I really love the contemporary forms, or doing my own work, but at the same time, I really love the traditional forms. And yet, I realized that I felt my forte was really creating my own work. And so it was through my Butoh journey, when I actually saw Butoh the first time, that I got hooked, because I felt that somehow this would lead me to a path to kind of recovering my childhood, and from then creating my own work. It was only later, after writing my dissertation, or during that time, that I realized that that really was the path I was going to be on. But I think also for me, it's like, even though it came out of Japan and Japanese bodies and sensibilities, it's, for so many years, it's become this global phenomena, and many people throughout the world have really embraced it. And I think also, for some reason, I don't even know why, I was interested in going to Japan many years before I went. So somehow it felt like destiny.
Thank you. Next question. What is it about the Japanese garden that moves you to return and perform throughout the years?
Well, there are a number of things. First of all, as I think I had said in my interview, for me, it became a second home. I became a guide in 2010, and soon after that, I was asked if I'd like to perform in the garden. So from then, I started with Wandering and Wondering, and that became an annual event. I have also done some small group works for moon viewing and Tanabata, as well as these crazy Butoh samurai and geisha who have appeared, especially during the the fall seasons with all the beautiful leaves. I think for me, for one thing, when my husband and I moved to Seattle, that idea of staying connected with the Pacific Rim, because he had lived in Japan even longer than I had, although he was becoming a writer and not involved in the arts such as I was, but we really liked that sense of staying connected. And so the Japanese garden with its cultural aspects helps me feel that way, but also the nature aspects, even though they're largely shaped by the hands of man or greatly shaped by the hands of man. Also, I grew up in nature so much in all seasons, and that's been something that's very important to me. So I feel really comfortable in nature, and I love the Japanese garden for the audiences because it's very family friendly, and Butoh often can be very intense, and in theaters it's really more geared towards adults. So I love that aspect and the fact that we can have a lot of interactions. And the seasons, not only seasons, but every moment. I'm a gardener as a profession, and I really know spending time outside, I can feel every change in the weather, the dampness, the light, etc. And so those moment by moment experiences are really wonderful in the garden.
I remember a few years ago there was a toddler who was interacting with one of the dancers, and it was such a sweet scene to see.
Yes, yes, that was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. Next question. Do you relate Butoh dance with Nichibu, Nihon Buyo, the traditional Japanese dance? If so, how?
Well, what was the question again?
Do you relate Butoh dance with Nichibu? I think it's also called Nihon Buyo, the traditional Japanese dance.
Yeah, and as I said, I have a little experience, not much, but a little bit experience. And I've seen a lot of traditional dance performance and theater performance. You know, I think one thing that comes to mind suddenly, actually, is one thing that I said about Hijikata had said, or supposedly had said, that the Butoh dancer is a corpse trying to stand up. So I was talking about how to stand up. And one of the things about that is somehow and I think about, I'm a Tai Chi practitioner, you know, once you open your space between your feet, the movement begins. So it's kind of like that in a way. You start maybe in a point of stillness. Once you start moving, then the movement just kind of keep going. It could be very slow. There might be stillness, but there's always that sense of motion. And the reason I mention that is because I remember when I was studying and seeing Nihon Buyo, for example, there's a lot about the angles and like the relationship of the head and the angle of the head to the shoulder. And so in Butoh, it's not always improvisational, but there is that sense of the body continually shaping and the space around that changing. So that's one thing. I think also there's a sense of the energy in the body. There's a strong containment. There's also sometimes I've played with themes like Tanabata, playing off of a Japanese story that kind of had a little more sense of that. There's also sometimes the way, from my background, and sometimes the way I travel through the space, and there's that lightness. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see, next question. What other cities in the world is Butoh popular in? Is Butoh perceived differently in those cities?
Yes, well, in the United States, New York has been a city, of course it's a very cosmopolitan city, where Butoh has been for many years. But really until the last 10 years or so, it was more people coming in and going, and all the famous artists, performed there. San Francisco had a really big Butoh scene for a number of years. So New York had a big Butoh festival for years, not at the moment, I don't think. And then San Francisco also did. Those are two big cities. Chicago has had a bit of a scene, but I spent a lot of time overseas. So in Italy, there's a very small town that has a really big movement center, lots of kinds of movement, and Butoh is very big there. One of the things, that's one example. Helsinki has a Japanese person, male. It is always the Japanese people who are leading these, but there are some major ones. Also, Berlin is very well known and around that area. Some of those artists have married, Japanese artists have married German citizens, and living there for so many years has colored their work, been influenced. But then remember that Butoh very early on, or early dance in Japan, was influenced by German Expressionism. So there's long been a connection, a crossover somehow between Germany and Japan in that way. But I'm also thinking, like in Italy, Atsushi Takenuchi is very well known there. He's not the only one, but there's a lot of work in nature. So, that's, depending where the artist lives and what they're drawn to, that'll shape them. I've actually worked with people, small groups of people in Oslo, more recently in Barcelona. So many places in the world. South America, many people. So I would say that the work where it ends up being is going to be shaped by the artists there and who their teachers and influences were, and also their culture. And then some people like Diego Piñon in Mexico are very influenced, even though he has a very strong background from Japan, he's very influenced by his native Indian, his mixed culture background there. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great questions. Who are some of the artists who are your biggest inspirations, or who are some of the artists who are your biggest inspiration?
Well, I would say, of course, Kazuo Ono maybe would be my biggest inspiration. But I say that because for me, Kazuo Ono, who is primarily improvisational in his performance, and he's the one who's known as the Soul Butoh. I feel that his contribution to the world, to Butoh, to dance, to art, to the world, is just that he inspired a lot of people. I'm not exactly sure why, but people just felt something. They were really drawn to his performance. He was very childlike in his performance. Some of you maybe don't know, he lived to be over 100, and he performed till later 90s. And his son took over, and unfortunately he just passed away just not too long ago. His style was quite different. So, but Kazuo Ono very much influenced me. And of course, Ashikawa, who was, I worked with her, trained under her, saw her perform a lot with her group, performed in her second group. So she has really influenced my aesthetic very much. So actually, Kazuo Ono is more improvisational, kind of childlike sense. And then Ashikawa, the more structured, working with imagery and finding shapes and movements to go with certain imagery. So those are really strong influences. But also, well, of course, Hijikata, through my work with Ashikawa and seeing films of him, because I never saw him live. Other people, Min Tanaka, who really, he came from a modern dance background, but really immersed himself in nature and forged his own way. And he's very like embryonic, this movement just keeps going. So very, very different than the others. And gosh, a number of people. I think sometimes I'm influenced by their art or their kind of particular individual style, but sometimes I'm just really influenced by their journey. And then also I have to remember, because I was a researcher, I started as a researcher, never having any idea or desire to become a Butoh dancer. And with Ashikawa asking me to join her group, it just happened. Thank you for your question.
Let's see. Another question. How does Butoh differ from modern dance?
Well, Butoh first of all, for example, in Europe and perhaps other countries, I'm not so aware of it, they don't use the word modern dance as more what Americans say, or people from the United States. They call it contemporary dance. So contemporary and modern could be the same at the same meaning, but it kind of has a little different meaning. In a way, although by now maybe I wouldn't say that, but Butoh could be called a contemporary style of dance from Japan, you know. I think the thing for me is definitely the journey can be a very individual journey, which it was for many, you know, well, contemporary dancers and choreographers. But for me, for example, I think of myself when I'm working with people as a director, not a choreographer. I mean, it depends what style or how the director, choreographer wants to work, how much they want to set down, you know, but it's not so much often about steps and moving in that way, but it's more about this narrative of images that you move from one to the other. But the other main thing I would say is the corporal experience, because I did modern dance for a number of years. And for me, the journey in Butoh is not about the physical body in terms of the muscles and the bones and the way I really like to move, the body likes to move, that kind of physicality, but it's all about transformation, the body changing through different images.
Thank you. I think, let's see, we have just enough time for one more question. So last question. One of the original concepts of Butoh comes from loss of identity. When you perform at Seattle Japanese Garden, which has its own unique identity, does that play a role in your mind when you dance?
Yeah, interesting question. I think you're right. It does have a unique identity. I think what it does in a way, I use the word transformation. So I think it's I didn't really get to talk too much about Wandering, but it came out of working with a very well-known Seattle sound artist, Susie Kozawa, who is famous for listening. She's a sound artist. She goes to any kind of space and listens to whatever sounds are there and images, or, you know, is able to tell ahead of time what any sound how it might be perceived. So it's about a body listening. So it's really, it gets to be a cellular level, you know. And I think in that way, you know, it is Joan, you know, but it is my body. But at the same time, it's just kind of disappearing that self-identity to be able to really meld and to transform, or to receive whatever inspires you from the Japanese garden in this case.
Thank you. Okay, well, if you have more questions for Joan, please visit her website at seattlebutoh-laage.com, Laage.com. And I think it's going to be also in the chat box. So, and somebody asked about website for classes. Would that be on your website?
Yeah, there'll be some information, and you can use my email there in that on that website to ask me personally too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you again for joining us tonight. Please stay tuned for a brief message from the Seattle Japanese Gardens Programs Manager, Jessica Gardner. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
I hope you enjoyed this presentation on the art of Butoh. We hope to offer more events like this in the future, including Kaleidoscope series presentations on Japanese ink painting and pine pruning. If you did enjoy this presentation, please consider making a small donation to the Seattle Japanese Garden to help support garden maintenance and future events and programming. Have a nice evening.